What happens when a man with a little bit of power tries to humiliate a woman he thinks is beneath him? At a major cruise port, a boarding agent drunk on his own authority decides a black woman in a hoodie doesn't deserve her luxury suite ticket. He mocks her, accuses her of fraud, and calls security to have her removed from the terminal. He thinks he is teaching her a lesson, but he is about to learn one. The woman he is trying to kick out of the port is the new director who owns the port. This isn't just a story of mistaken identity. It is a story of brutal public karma. The relentless, echoing chime of the PA system bled into the sterile air of Liberty International Port. Terminal B was a river of human anxiety, a place where time simultaneously dragged and sprinted. But for the thousands of passengers scurrying like ants, Elena Ross was just another face in the crowd. To them, she was just someone going home or going on vacation. However, this was her new, sprawling, and impossibly complex workplace. At 42, she had just been appointed the Director of Operations for the entire Liberty Port Authority, a position that made her one of the most powerful women in maritime tourism. But tonight she was not Director Ross. She was just Elena. She wore a simple, bright blue hoodie. The hood pulled down a pair of black joggers and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. It was 8 p.m. on a Thursday, and she was setting sail to attend a transportation symposium in London. She could have used the private executive entrance. She could have been driven to the ship in a black car. But Elena had built her career on one principle. You can't manage what you don't see from the ground. And the ground for a port was Embarkation Gate B12. She was traveling with Apex Cruise Lines, a major partner company. Her first 3 weeks as director had been a blur of spreadsheets, board meetings, and infrastructure reports. She hadn't had a single moment to be in the terminal, to feel the passenger experience. This trip was her first chance. She wanted to see the bottlenecks, the stressed staff, the dirty bathrooms, the real-time failures that never made it into PowerPoint presentations. Her luxury suite ticket, secured on her personal credit card, was tucked inside her passport. She clutched the worn leather passport holder, a gift from her late father, and navigated the throng, taut. She observed everything. The long, snaking line at the coffee kiosk where a single barista was fighting a losing battle against a faulty espresso machine. The flickering fluorescent light panel near the restrooms that gave the tile a sickly, greenish hue. The way the security checkpoint, even at this hour, felt more like a cattle prod than a service. We can do better than this, she thought, her mind already drafting memos. That light panel is a 10-minute fix. That barista needs support. She approached Gate B12, a wide glass-walled atrium overlooking the rain-slicked dock. Boarding for the London voyage, Apex Voyage 771, was already in final call status on the glowing blue screens. A cluster of weary travelers was gathered, the social hierarchy of sea travel on full display. The sleek, suit-clad suite passengers were already gone, presumably sipping champagne. The restless Group 2 and Group 3 passengers were crowding the stanchions, backpacks cutting into their shoulders, anxious not to be the last one on, fighting for space on the gangway. And presiding over this small kingdom was the boarding agent. Elena spotted him instantly. He wasn't just working. He was performing. He was a man in his late 40s with a sallow complexion and thinning hair carefully combed over a pale scalp. His blue Apex Cruise uniform strained at the buttons of his midsection. His name tag pinned slightly askew read Frank Miller. Frank was barking into the microphone. Group 3. One said Group 3 only. If you are Group 4, you are not Group 3. Do not even try it. Step back. Step back. He sighed with exaggerated impatience as a young family struggled with a stroller. Ma'am, that stroller has to be checked as luggage. You were told this at the counter. You're holding up the entire line. Unbelievable. The mother, flushed with embarrassment, apologized profusely. Frank rolled his eyes and snatched the tag from his printer, ripping it off with a violent tug and slapping it onto the stroller handle. Elena felt a familiar tightening in her chest. It was the distaste she always felt for small-time tyrants, the petty abuse of temporary power. She had seen it her whole life. The security guard who relished turning people away. The clerk who found joy in a missing form. The boarding agent who acted like the ship was his personal property. She watched him for another 5 minutes. He randomly selected a young man of Middle Eastern descent for an additional security screening, pulling him from the line with a sharp "You, sir. Come here." He sneered at a college student who asked if she had time to use the restroom. Boarding is finalizing, miss. You can either get on the ship or swim to London. Your choice. Elena sighed. This wasn't just a stressed employee. This was a bully. Her phone buzzed. It was Arthur Blake, the CEO of Apex Cruise Lines. They were supposed to meet in the exclusive lounge. But she had texted him, running late. Want to see the terminal floor? Boarding with the masses. See you on the ship. His reply came back, brave woman, they're waiting for you in the lounge. Are you sure? I can send someone. I'm sure. She typed back, at the gate now? She looked up. The line had thinned. The last of Group 4 was shuffling through. Elena, holding her luxury suite ticket, was technically supposed to have boarded ages ago. She approached the podium where Frank Miller was now tapping impatiently on his terminal, looking eager to close the gate. She stepped up to the counter, holding out her passport and ticket. Hi, sorry I'm late. Elena Ross for Suite 2A. Frank didn't look up from his screen. He held out a dismissive hand. Passport. Elena placed it in his hand. Frank took it, his eyes still glued to his monitor. He flipped it open, his thumbs smudging the plastic on her photo page. Finally, he looked up. His eyes traveled from the photo, a professional headshot in a business suit, up to her face. He scanned her. The simple, bright blue hoodie, the joggers, the plain face free of makeup, ... A flicker of something confusion, then suspicion, then a deep, ingrained contempt passed over his features. He looked back at the passport. Elena Ross. He pronounced it with a deliberate, mocking slowness. Then he looked at the ticket in her other hand. The bold VIP suite was printed clearly at the top. A slow, ugly smirk spread across Frank Miller's face. He let out a short, sharp huff of a laugh. Luxury suite, huh? He said, his voice dripping with condescension. Honey, I think you're at the wrong gate. Or maybe just in the wrong line. Elena kept her voice perfectly level, the way she did when a contractor tried to overcharge her by 6 figures. That's voyage 771 to London, Suite 2A. That's me. Frank leaned back, crossing his arms. He was enjoying this. Right? Look, the standard staterooms are full. We don't have any more upgrades available. So whatever story you were planning to... I'm not looking for an upgrade, Elena said, her voice dropping a degree. I'm holding my ticket. Please scan it. You're about to close boarding. Frank laughed again, this time loud enough for the few remaining passengers in the seating area to turn and look. Scan it? Oh, I'll scan it. He snatched the ticket from her hand and slammed it onto the glass scanner. The machine beeped. A sharp, negative error sound. Frank's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He turned the monitor so she could just barely see the red invalid message. Well, what a surprise, he said, his voice booming with false authority. Just like I thought. This ticket is flagged. It's invalid, fraudulent. He tossed the ticket and her passport back onto the counter. A clear gesture of dismissal. Now, he said, puffing out his chest, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the gate. We are trying to board a ship here. The air in the gate area seemed to crackle. The remaining passengers, a mix of stragglers and those with boarding group anxiety, were now openly staring. Elena felt the familiar heat of 100 eyes on her. It was a feeling she had known since she was a girl. The unwelcome spotlight of public prejudice. She didn't move. She didn't retrieve her passport. She simply looked at Frank Miller, her gaze flat and analytical. There is nothing wrong with that ticket, Mr. Miller, she stated. It was not a plea. It was a fact. It was booked 3 weeks ago through our corporate travel portal. Scan it again or type in the locator code manually. Frank scoffed, leaning forward on the podium as if speaking to a child. Listen, lady, he spat. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know a bogus ticket when I see one. I know someone trying to scam their way into a seat they didn't pay for. And you? You fit the description perfectly. The implication hung in the air, thick and toxic. People like you, description. Elena asked, her voice dangerously quiet. And what description would that be? Frank gestured vaguely at her hoodie and joggers. You come here last minute, dressed like that, holding a $7,000 ticket. It's a classic move. You probably lifted this from someone's bag. Or maybe you've got a fake credit card story. I've heard them all. A woman from the seating area, older, draped in a cashmere shawl and smelling faintly of expensive perfume, chimed in. He's right, you know? Good for him for being so diligent. You can't be too careful these days. The nerve of some people. Let's call this woman Margaret. She smiled encouragingly at Frank, who seemed to swell with her support. He now had an audience and an ally. Thank you, ma'am, Frank said to Margaret, preening. He turned back to Elena, his power trip fully engaged. You hear that? The real passengers appreciate my diligence. Now, I've told you to step aside. I am responsible for the safety and security of this ship. You are responsible for customer service, Elena corrected him, her patience now worn down to a knife's edge. And you are failing at it. I am not asking you, Mr. Miller. I am telling you to type in my locator code. Or if you are incapable of that, find your supervisor. Get the station manager. The request for a supervisor was a direct challenge to his authority, and he reacted like he'd been slapped. Supervisor, he barked, his face reddening. I am the authority here. I am the boarding agent in charge. There is no one else you need to talk to. The only people you're going to talk to are the ones who will be escorting you out of my terminal. He picked up the phone at his podium, his fingers stabbing at the numbers for port security. You're done, he sneered at her. You wanted to make a scene. Well, you got one. Your boarding is denied. That's my final call. On what grounds? Elena demanded, her voice finally rising, cutting through the whispers of the crowd. On the grounds of suspected ticket fraud, Frank yelled back. On the grounds of causing a disturbance, on the grounds that I said so. That's all that matters. I am the law here. He spoke into the phone. Yeah, this is Frank Miller at Gate B12, Apex 771. I need security now. I have a person here, non-compliant, refusing to leave the boarding area. Suspected fraud. She's getting aggressive. Lena stared at him, aghast. Aggressive. She hadn't moved a muscle. She hadn't raised her voice. He was painting her as a threat. A classic, ugly script she knew all too well. The passengers gasped. The word aggressive combined with her appearance was all the confirmation they needed. They shuffled back, pulling their carry-on bags closer. In an instant, she was the problem. She was the danger. You're making a mistake, Elena said, her voice low and shaking. Not with fear, but with a profound, icy rage. A very, very big mistake. Oh, I'm making a mistake, Frank cackled, hanging up the phone. Honey, your mistake was thinking this would work. You picked the wrong agent on the wrong night. He turned his back to her, a final act of dismissal, and grabbed the microphone to address the gate. Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the slight delay. We are just dealing with a security matter. We will resume boarding as soon as this individual is removed. He had just labeled her a criminal to the entire terminal. Elena stood frozen for a moment. She could feel the stares. She saw a young man filming her on his phone. She could right now pull out her own credentials. Her Port Authority executive ID was in her wallet. One flash of that gold-embossed card and this entire charade would evaporate. Frank Miller's world would end. But a part of her, the part that was weary of a lifetime of these small indignities, hesitated. If she showed him her ID now, it would be a quiet victory. He would stammer, apologize, and she would board her ship. But what about the next person? The next black woman in a hoodie who wasn't the port director. What would happen to her? No, Elena thought, her resolve hardening. He called security. Let's see this through. Let him dig. She calmly crossed her arms, standing her ground just outside the boarding lane. She would wait. She would let him play out the entire ugly scene he had written. And when he was at the very height of his power trip, she would bring the whole rotten stage down on his head. The air was thick with a new, anxious tension. Frank tapped his foot, looking impatiently down the concourse for the uniforms he had summoned. He was a king on a cardboard throne, and he had no idea the executioner was already at the door. The 5 minutes it took for security to arrive felt like an hour. Gate B12 became a bubble of silent, gawking tension. Frank Miller busied himself with performative tasks, aggressively straightening the stanchion ropes, slamming drawers, and pointedly avoiding eye contact with Elena. He was the picture of a man in control. Yet a fine sheen of sweat was visible on his pale forehead. He had made his move, and now the entire gate area was waiting for the consequences. Elena, for her part, remained perfectly still. Her stillness was an act of defiance. She would not be intimidated. She would not pace or plead or argue. She simply stood, a silent statue of accusation, forcing everyone to reckon with the scene. The man with the phone was still filming. She made a point to look directly at his camera for a brief second, her expression unreadable. Margaret, the passenger in the cashmere shawl, muttered to her seatmate, "Why won't she just leave? She's holding us all up. So selfish." Finally, 2 figures in the dark blue uniforms of the Liberty Port Authority's security approached. They were not the federal police, but the port's own internal security. The ones who handled disturbances, theft, and access control. In effect, they were Elena's new employees. The lead officer was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weary face and a name tag that read Officer Cole. His partner, younger and more alert, was Officer Lee. "Mr. Miller," Cole said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. He'd clearly dealt with Frank before. Frank sprang to life, his relief palpable. "Officer Cole, thank God. Right here. This woman." He pointed at Elena as if she were a piece of hazardous luggage. "I caught her trying to board with a fraudulent suite ticket. The system flagged it red. I told her to step aside and she became belligerent, refused to leave, started causing a scene. She's a security risk. I want her removed from the terminal." Officer Cole's gaze settled on Elena. He took in the bright blue hoodie, the joggers, the expensive-looking but unflashy carry-on bag at her feet, and her crossed arms. He saw what Frank wanted him to see, a potential problem. "Ma'am," Cole began, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Officer Cole. Mr. Miller here says you're causing a disturbance. I need you to tell me what's going on." "What's going on, officer?" Elena said, her voice clear and precise. "Is that Mr. Miller has refused to properly scan my valid paid-for ticket? He has accused me of fraud based on," she paused, letting the words hang, "his own assumptions. He has publicly humiliated me, and he has lied to you, claiming I was belligerent. A claim I'm sure that gentleman's phone recording will disprove." Frank sputtered. "She's lying. The system said invalid. She's trying to twist it." Cole held up a hand to silence Frank, a clear sign of his own weariness with the boarding agent's theatrics. He turned back to Elena. "Ma'am, this is a simple situation. If the ticket is invalid, it's invalid. That's an Apex Cruise Lines issue, not a security one. But if you're refusing to leave the gate area, that becomes a security issue. Can I please see your ticket and your identification?" This was the moment, the checkmate. "Of course, officer," Elena said. She reached into her bag, not for her wallet, but for her passport holder. She handed him the passport and the luxury suite ticket. Frank scoffed. "He'll see. It's fake. The whole thing is fake." Officer Cole took the documents. He opened the passport. He read the name Elena Ross. He looked at her, then at the photo. He then looked at the ticket. He was a 20-year veteran. He knew how to read a ticket. He saw the locator code, the ticket number, the paid status. Everything looked perfectly legitimate. He walked over to the podium, past a fuming Frank, and used his own access code to get into the primary terminal system, a system that bypassed the cruise line's simple gate scanner. He typed in the passport number. Frank, trying to save face, leaned over his shoulder. See, it's going to come back stolen or ... Frank's voice died in his throat. On Cole's screen, a different kind of profile loaded. It wasn't a passenger manifest. It was a Port Authority employee file. Ross, Elena M. Title, Director of Operations, Liberty Port Authority. Clearance, St. 1, top level. Status, active. Officer Cole's blood ran cold. He had, for the last 5 minutes, been treating the new head of the entire port, his ultimate boss, like a common trespasser. He went white. He snapped the passport shut and spun around, his posture changing instantly from cop to at attention. "Mr. Miller," Cole said, his voice suddenly strangled. "What? What is it?" Frank demanded, not having seen the screen clearly. "Call Port Police. Let's get her out of here." "Mr. Miller," Cole repeated, "I need you to scan this ticket again manually." "I'm not. She ... do it now." Cole's voice had a new, sharp edge of panic. Confused and angry, Frank snatched the ticket from Cole's hand. "Fine, it's not going to work." He angrily typed in the 6-digit locator code. He hit enter. The screen flashed. This time, it wasn't red. It was a bright, flashing green. "Rosalina, Suite 2A, luxury stateroom. Check-in complete. Port Authority VIP Apex Prime Partner." The entire podium was silent. Frank Miller stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face, leaving his sallow skin the color of old parchment. He looked at the screen. He looked at Elena. He looked at the LPA VIP code. "Ha ... he whispered, his brain failing to make the connection. "That's impossible," he stammered. "The system." It beeped. It said invalid. "You all heard it. You scanned it wrong," Elena said, her voice like steel. "Or your scanner is faulty. Or you intentionally bypassed the scan to make a scene. Any way you look at it, Mr. Miller, you failed." "Now, wait just a minute," Frank said, his voice rising in a desperate, squeaking panic. This is a trick. You can't be. Who are you?" Before Elena could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. A voice that dripped with authority, wealth, and profound irritation. "Elena, there you are. What in God's name is going on out here? You're holding up the ship." A man in a $1,000 suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, strode out from the VIP gangway. It was Arthur Blake, the chief executive officer of Apex Cruise Lines. He had clearly been waiting just inside the ship's door, and his patience had run out. He stopped, taking in the scene. Elena looking furious. 2 security officers, one of whom looked like he'd seen a ghost. And his boarding agent Frank, who was trembling and pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "Mr. Blake?" Frank yelped, his panic turning comical. "Sir, this woman, she was trying to board with a fake ticket. I stopped her. I was protecting the company." Arthur Blake looked at Frank. He looked at Elena, his business partner, the new director of the entire port. A look of pure, unadulterated horror dawned on his face. He understood exactly what had happened. "Frank," Arthur Blake said, his voice lethally soft, "what did you just say?" The silence that fell over Gate B12 was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket punctuated only by the distant hum of the ventilation system. The remaining passengers, Margaret included, were frozen, realizing they were no longer watching a simple dispute. They were witnessing a corporate execution. Frank Miller's world had compressed to the space. Between the podium and the CEO, his eyes darted frantically between Arthur Blake's thunderous expression and Elena's cold, condemning stare. "Sir, Mr. Blake, I was just following procedure," Frank stammered, his bravado utterly eviscerated. "The ticket, it scanned red. I swear it did. And she looks. I mean, she didn't look like. What? Mr. Miller?" Elena's voice sliced through his pathetic defense. Frank flinched. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say a luxury suite passenger. He couldn't say a VIP. He couldn't say white. Arthur Blake stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. His fury wasn't just at the offense. It was at the liability. The Port Authority director, his primary port partner, humiliated by his staff in public with witnesses with phones. He could already hear the lawyers. Frank Blake said, "Do you have any idea? Any idea at all who this is?" Frank shook his head, his eyes wide and pleading. She's nobody. I mean, she's a passenger," says Blake announced, his voice projecting for all to hear. "Is Ms. Elena Ross. She is the new director of operations for the entire Liberty International Port. She is, in effect, our landlord. She is the woman who decides if Apex Cruise Lines gets to keep these gates. She is the woman who was sailing to London with me to negotiate our new 20-year lease." Margaret, the woman in the cashmere shawl, let out an audible gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. The man who had been filming slowly lowered his phone, his jaw slack. Officer Cole, who had been trying to blend into the wall, stepped forward, holding Elena's passport. "Confirmed, sir? Port Director, Street 1 clearance. We were just verifying." Frank Miller made a small, choking sound. He looked at Elena, at the woman in the bright blue hoodie he had called Honey, accused of theft and tried to have arrested. He wasn't just looking at a passenger he had wronged. He was looking at the woman who held his entire professional life in the palm of her hand. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. She can't be." Elena finally stepped forward, taking her passport from Officer Cole's still shaking hand. She walked directly up to the podium, forcing Frank to step back. She was no longer just Elena. She was Director Ross. The power in the room had shifted so violently, was almost a physical force. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice radiating an authority that dwarfed his petty podium kingdom. "For the last 15 minutes, you have been a model of perfect incompetence. You failed to scan a valid ticket. You failed to identify a VIP partner, a failure your system is designed to prevent. You failed to call a supervisor when requested. And you failed spectacularly to treat a passenger with a shred of dignity." She turned her head slightly to look at the crowd and then at the phone that was now very slowly being raised again. "But you didn't fail, Mr. Miller. You chose. You chose to see a black woman in a hoodie and decided she was a criminal. You chose to believe your own bigotry over the evidence in your hand. You chose to publicly humiliate me. You chose to call security and lie, claiming I was aggressive, a word you used to paint me as a threat. You did all of this because you couldn't imagine that I could possibly belong in a luxury suite." She leaned in, her voice dropping so only he, Blake, and the officers could hear. "You didn't just have a bad night, Frank. You exposed a rot, and I am the exterminator." Frank began to babble. "No, please, Ms. Ross. I didn't mean it. It was the system, the stress. I was just trying. I have a family. Please, you should have thought of that," Elena said, her voice devoid of any pity. "Before you decided to play God with Gate B12. Arthur Blake, seeing the PR nightmare unfolding, stepped in. "Officer Cole, thank you. This is now an internal Apex Cruise Lines matter. We will handle Mr. Miller." Cole nodded, relieved. "Ma'am," he said to Elena, a question and an apology in one. "You're dismissed, officer," Elena said, not unkindly, but firm. "But I will be pulling your body cam footage, and the full incident report will be on my desk by 8 a.m. Understood?" "Yes, Director." "Absolutely," Cole said. He and his partner practically evaporated, leaving Frank alone with his executioners. "Frank," Arthur Blake said, his voice flat, "hand your badge and your vest to the station manager. She's on her way. You are suspended indefinitely, pending termination. Get your personal items. An escort will walk you out. You are not to speak to another passenger. You are not to touch that terminal again. Am I clear?" Frank Miller's body seemed to collapse. The bluster, the arrogance, the petty tyranny, it all drained away, leaving a pathetic, trembling husk. He nodded, unable to speak. His 20-year career had just ended in the span of 3 minutes. Elena, Arthur said, his tone shifting instantly to one of deep professional concern. My God, I am. Words cannot express the apology that Apex Cruise Lines owes you. Elena looked at him and then at the other passengers who were all pretending not to be hanging on every word. We can discuss the apology on the ship, Arthur, she said, her voice carrying. Right now, I believe you have a ship to board. She picked up her carry-on bag, smoothed the front of her hoodie, and without a backward glance at the broken man behind the counter, she walked down the gangway. She stepped into the quiet, plush sanctuary of the luxury suite deck, leaving the chaos of Terminal B behind her. But for Frank Miller, the nightmare was just beginning. The gangway door thunked shut behind Elena, sealing her in the hushed, climate-controlled sanctuary of the first-class deck. A flight attendant, a cabin steward doll smiles and crisp uniform immediately approached. Ms. Ross, welcome aboard. Mr. Blake saved your seat. Can I get you a glass of champagne, or perhaps some water? Water would be wonderful. Thank you, Elena said, her voice still tight. She slid into Suite 2002, a spacious pod with its own balcony. The adrenaline was still pumping, leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. She sank into the plush armchair, the rage finally giving way to a bone-deep weariness. It wasn't the victory she felt. It was the exhaustion of the fight. The fact that in her position with all her power, she still had to have this fight. Arthur Blake slid into the seat across the aisle. He had shed his furious CEO persona and now looked like a man trying to defuse a bomb. Elena, he began, I have already texted my head of HR and our chief legal officer. Miller will be fired before we leave the dock. That's a given. I'm blacklisting him from Apex and our partner lines. What else can I do? What does the Port Authority need from us? Elena took a long, slow sip of the water the steward handed her. She looked at Arthur, a man she generally respected. What you can do, Arthur, she said, is not the issue. The issue is what you will do. This wasn't one bad apple. This was your system, your culture, that allowed that apple to rot on the branch for, what did he say? 20 years. He's an outlier, Elena, I promise you. Is he? She cut him off. That woman in the cashmere shawl, Margaret. She agreed with him. She felt empowered to add her own little drop of poison. Frank felt so comfortable in his prejudice that he performed it publicly. He yelled it. He called security. He wasn't afraid of repercussions, Arthur. He was expecting a promotion. Why? Arthur had no answer. He just rubbed his temples. I'll mandate a full review, sensitivity training, bias workshops, anything you want. Oh, I'll be mandating them, Elena said. But not just for Apex. For every cruise line, every contractor, every single employee who wears a badge at Liberty International Port. This was a gift in a way. Mr. Miller just gave me the political capital I need to do what I was hired to do. As the ship pushed back from the dock, Elena looked out the window. She could see the blue and red lights of a port police car now parked at the end of the gangway. They were waiting for Frank back in Terminal B. Frank Miller was living the worst moment of his life. The station manager, a harried woman named Sarah, had arrived, her face grim. Frank, my office. Now, the walk from gate B12 to the small management office behind the check-in counters was a walk of shame. The passengers he had once lorded over were now boarding, staring at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. The man who had been filming was narrating to his companion. And that's the racist boarding agent getting hauled off. The video was already uploading. In the office, Sarah didn't mince words. Suspended. Full pay. Pending investigation. But you and I both know what pending means. You're done, Frank. You just humiliated the new port director. You insulted the CEO of the line to his face. What in God's name were you thinking? The ticket beeped. Sarah, I swear, he pleaded, the lie sounding thin even to his own ears. The logs don't show a misscan, Frank, Sarah said, reading from her terminal. They show a manual override. Your manual override. You flagged her ticket as fraudulent. You typed in the code to block her. You created the problem you then tried to solve by calling security. Frank's face crumpled. He had been caught. He had done it so many times before. Flagged a ticket for someone who looked suspicious to teach them a lesson, to make them sweat. It was a petty power he wielded, and this time he had done it to the one person on earth who could destroy him for it. Save it, Sarah said, disgusted. Officer Cole and Officer Lee are outside. They have to take your statement, and then you have to be escorted from the building. Your badge is deactivated. As of now, she hit a key. The small green light on the ID badge clipped to his shirt pocket clicked off. The sound was as final as a gavel. The two security officers, Cole and Lee, were waiting. Cole's face was impassive. All business. Mr. Miller, Cole said. We need to take your formal statement about the disturbance you reported. The disturbance, Frank whispered. Yes, the one you called in. The one where you alleged a passenger was aggressive and fraudulent. This was the final agonizing turn of the screw. He wasn't being interviewed as a victim. He was being investigated as the cause. He had to sit there under the flat gaze of the officer he had summoned and recount his own lies. Knowing that Officer Cole knew exactly what he had done, he had to explain why he thought Elena Ross was a criminal. He stammered. He contradicted himself. He blamed the system, the stress, the late hour. He tried to paint Elena as shifty and evasive. Officer Cole just typed his face a mask. And at what point did she threaten you, Mr. Miller? You used the word aggressive on the phone? Well, her tone. She was, demanding to board the ship she paid for. Cole clarified, his fingers still moving. Yes, but in a way, an aggressive way. After 30 minutes of this procedural waterboarding, Cole finally closed his laptop. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We have what we need. Officer Lee will escort you to the employee exit. The walk. That was the worst part. Not the firing, not the interrogation, the walk. He wasn't allowed to go through the public areas. He had to take the sterile gray service corridors. The back of house he used to stride through like a king. Officer Lee, a kid half his age, walked silently behind him, holding Frank's empty lunchbox, which had been cleared from his locker. Every employee they passed the cleaners. The baggage handlers, the catering staff stopped and stared. The news had already spread through the port's internal grapevine like wildfire. Frank Miller at B12 tried to arrest the new director. Canned on the spot. It was a pariah. The smirks, the whispers, the head shaking. It was unbearable. He who had berated these same cleaners for being too slow, who had written up these same baggage handlers for taking long breaks. They were all watching his downfall. He was led to the employee exit, a gray metal door that opened onto a windswept parking lot far from the passenger terminals. Have a good night, Mr. Miller, Officer Lee said, his voice neutral. Frank stepped out into the damp, cold night. The door snicked shut behind him, the magnetic lock engaging with a heavy thud. He stood there in his strained blue uniform, clutching his lunchbox. His car was in the employee lot, a 15-minute walk away. The rain began to fall, cold and stinging. He looked back at the massive glowing terminal. His kingdom for 20 years, and he, the self-proclaimed law, was now locked out. He began to cry. Pathetic, gulping sobs of self-pity. He wasn't crying because he was racist. He was crying because he'd been caught by the time Elena Ross landed in Southampton. The story was already a Category 5 hurricane on the internet. The video shot by the passenger at Gate B12 had been posted to TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, titled "Karen Gate Agent Tries to Arrest Port Director." It was a viral sensation. It had been picked up by news aggregators, and by the time Elena switched her phone on, she had 88 text messages, 42 missed calls, and a formal statement from Apex Cruise Line's PR department waiting in her inbox. The statement was a masterpiece of corporate groveling. Apex Cruise Lines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The employee in question has been terminated. We are in contact with Ms. Ross and offer our most profound apologies. The internet, however, was not so forgiving. Frank Miller, Apex Cruise Lines, and the hashtag #SailingWhileBlack were all trending. His face was everywhere. He was the new archetype of petty, racist bureaucracy. His 20 years of service had been reduced to a 2-minute clip of his worst, most hateful moment. But Elena was not focused on the social media storm. She was at war. From her hotel room in London, she spent the next 48 hours on a series of brutal, high-level video calls. The first was with Arthur Blake. "Arthur," she said, her face projected onto the cruise line's boardroom screen. "Your apology is noted, but it's not enough. Your company has a problem. You will by Monday provide me with a full audit of all discrimination complaints filed against your staff at Liberty in the last 5 years. You will also provide me with your current bias training protocols. And be prepared, they will be found wanting." The second call was with her own senior staff at the LPA. "What happened to me," she told her team of department heads, "is unacceptable. But it is a symptom. Mr. Miller was our problem long before he was mine. He wore an Apex uniform, but he operated in our house. He harassed our customers and our security team. Officer Cole, his first instinct was to believe the man in the uniform, not the woman in the hoodie. We are going to change that immediately." She issued a directive. It was called the Gate B12 Initiative, effective immediately. All 30,000 employees at Liberty International Port from Cruise Line, CEOs to janitorial staff, would be required to undergo a new mandatory and annual passenger dignity and bias certification. It was not going to be a 20-minute click-through video. It would be an in-person 8-hour seminar developed by leading sociologists and psychologists with rigorous testing. Failure to pass meant suspension of your port badge. A second failure meant revocation. The cruise lines, the retailers, the contractors, they screamed. The cost, the logistics, the lost man-hours. It was astronomical. Elena didn't budge. "You can find the budget," she told a consortium of cruise managers. "Or you can find another port. Your choice. Your lease negotiations depend on your full compliance." They complied. She also personally reviewed Officer Cole's file. He had a clean record, and his body cam footage confirmed he had acted professionally, if cautiously. He had, in fact, been the one to de-escalate by taking her ID. Elena called him. "Officer Cole," she said. "Yes, Director," he answered, his voice tense. "I reviewed the incident. You defaulted to believing the agent. I want you to ask yourself why, but you also followed procedure, and you were respectful. You're not the problem. You're the solution. I'm putting you in charge of coordinating the new port-wide bias training for all security and law enforcement. I expect you to be the example." Cole, who had been expecting to be fired, was stunned. "Director? Yes. Yes, ma'am. I won't let you down." Elena was rebuilding the system, and she was using the very people who had been part of the old one to do it. The final piece was the public. She gave one and only one interview. She sat down with a respected maritime journalist and laid out her plan. "This was never about me," she said, her voice calm and powerful. "It was not about a luxury suite ticket. It was about a culture that allows an employee to believe that any passenger, regardless of their ticket, can be treated as less than human. It was about a man who thought his uniform gave him the right to be a bigot. Here at Liberty, those days are over. Our badge is not a symbol of power. It is a symbol of service. And if you cannot serve everyone with dignity, you will not work here. Period." Her interview became the new viral clip. She wasn't just a victim. She was a leader. 3 months later, Liberty International Port felt different. The air was the same. The coffee still smelled stale, but the attitude had shifted. The Gate B12 initiative was in full swing. Employees were sitting in classrooms having uncomfortable but necessary conversations. Customer complaints were down 40%. The Elena Ross story had become an internal legend, a warning. And an inspiration. Elena was walking the floor of Terminal C. This time in her full director's suit when she saw a familiar face. It was Margaret, the woman in the cashmere shawl, struggling to read a departure board. Elena approached her. "Can I help you find your ship, ma'am?" Margaret looked up, recognized her instantly, and blushed a deep, painful red. "Oh, Director Ross, I'm so... That day? I just... I'm so terribly sorry." "We're all learning," Elena said, not unkindly. "What voyage are you looking for?" "A Gate C11, the woman mumbled. "Right this way," Elena said, and she personally escorted the woman to her gate, chatting pleasantly about the weather. It was the ultimate power move, Grace. But what of Frank Miller? His karma was not a single event. It was a slow, agonizing disintegration. After his firing, he was a pariah. The video was so public that no cruise line, no airport, not even a regional cargo depot would touch him. He applied for jobs as a travel agent, a hotel concierge, even a rental car agent. The moment they Googled his name, the interview was over. He lost his apartment, his car. His wife, who he had married for her perceived status, left him disgusted by the public shame and more so by the loss of his income. He was last seen 6 months after the incident, not in a crisp uniform, but in a faded orange vest. He was working for a third-party sanitation crew, the kind hired to clean the outside of the port's parking garages in the middle of the night. One night, working a 3 a.m. shift picking up trash, he looked up at the glittering expanse of Terminal B. He could see the warm lights of the gates, the sleek stacks of the ships, the place he had once called his kingdom. He was on the outside, literally picking up the refuse of the world he had been so proud to be a part of. He had lost everything, not because of Elena Ross, not because of a system, but because for 20 years he had nurtured a seed of hatred in his heart. And that night he had chosen to let it bloom, unaware that he was standing directly in the shadow of the one woman who had the power and the will to cut the whole toxic plant down at the root. Elena Ross, meanwhile, was in her office signing off on the lease renewal for Apex Cruise Lines, a lease that now included the dignity clause as a non-negotiable addendum. She had one not just for herself, but for every passenger who would ever walk through her port again. 1 year almost to the day had passed. The Gate B12 initiative was no longer an initiative. It was simply the culture. Liberty International had just been named Most Improved Port for passenger experience in a global maritime index. It was 8 p.m. on a Thursday. Elena Ross stood near a newsstand, a baseball cap pulled low over her hair, wearing a simple bright blue hoodie. It was a test, a personal one. She was at Terminal B, watching Gate B12 from a distance. The London voyage, Apex 7971, was in its final boarding stage. A new boarding agent, a young man named Sam, was managing the podium. He was efficient, polite, and completely unremarkable, which in Elena's eyes made him perfect. Then it happened. A young man, probably in his early 20s, ran up to the podium, frantic. "Please, please, I'm on this ship. My app, it just crashed. I can't get my boarding pass." He was panicked, sweating, and holding his phone, which showed a spinning loading wheel. Elena tensed. This was the moment, the stress point. This was when a Frank Miller would have seen a problem. A disorganized, non-compliant kid trying to scam his way on. An older man in the shrinking line huffed, "Oh, come on, kid. Get your life together. You're holding everyone up." Sam, the boarding agent, didn't even look at the older man. He focused his full, calm attention on the student. "No problem, sir. It happens. Let's not worry about the app. What's your name?" "David. David Smith." "David," Sam said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I see you. Cabin 343. You're checked in and good to go. The system knows you're here. Don't even worry about the app." He quickly printed a fresh, crisp cardstock boarding pass. "Here you go. You've got plenty of time. Just take a breath. We'll get you home." The young man looked like he was about to cry with relief. "Thank you, man. Thank you so much. I thought I was going to miss it." "We've got you," Sam said with a smile. "Have a great voyage." The older man in line grumbled something about coddling. But Sam just looked at him, his smile not fading, and said, "Next." Sir Elena watched the exchange, a profound, quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. This was the victory. It wasn't the viral videos or the firing or even the industry awards. It was this. It was the absence of cruelty. It was the silence where Frank's yelling used to be. It was a young agent trained in the new culture, choosing empathy over power, service over sadism. She pulled the brim of her cap lower, a small smile playing on her lips. She turned and walked toward her own gate. She was flying to Chicago well, taking a connecting transfer to the rail Lincoln, a ticket she'd bought that morning. She was once again just a woman in a hoodie heading for her trip. And for the first time in a long time, she knew with absolute certainty that in her port, that was all she needed to be. Thank you for listening to this story. What happened to Frank Miller wasn't fate. It was a choice. He chose prejudice, and that choice cost him everything. Elena Ross, on the other hand, didn't just win her seat on the ship. She used that moment of ugly discrimination to change an entire system. She proved that the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's rising up and tearing down the rotten foundation so that no one else has to suffer the same injustice. It's a powerful reminder that the person you look down on today might just be the person you answer to tomorrow. We hope this story resonated with you. If it did, please let us know in the comments what you think the most powerful form of karma is. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where the arrogant finally get what they deserve. Thanks for watching.